I used to be a research assistant in the local museum, and my main focus was paleontology. The department in question dealt with any species which has since become extinct, from birds, mammals, and reptiles to fish, insects, algae, and plants. The museum housed about 200,000 exhibits, though as in any museum, the bulk of these were retained in storerooms. My job was to sort through the exhibits that were not on display and determine the importance, rarity, or scientific interest of these specimens. It was my dream job for the first few months. Like pretty much every kid, I'd been fascinated by dinosaurs and other extinct animals. The day began with some basic tasks, such as the preparation of fossils, a complex process, but one I never saw one as quite as important as physical analysis. Once this was done though, it was my job to finally catalog the specimens. This was basically a matter of filling in the form and writing a brief description of the exhibit, as well as the age, date and collection, and other relevant information. After this, I would assign them a storage location, in a filing cabinet, box, or in a random cupboard when the storage situation was dire. Now I think things started to go downhill a couple of months ago, back in August. The museum was closed for obvious reasons, and it was only me and a few other staff members around. About an hour into my work, I was walking into the storerooms, my head buried in files on assorted bivalve fossils, when I bumped into the director of the department, Rachel. She was also busy reading through the files, so we didn't see each other at first. She stopped short, almost making me walk into her, and peered up at me in surprise. "Oh, hi, I didn't realize you were there." I'd actually never met her before. I thought this was odd, but at the time I naively chalked it up to inexperience. I hadn't been here for long, after all. I smiled. "Hey, I'm not exactly invisible, you know." "No, but you haven't been here long," she remarked, looking more than a little amused. "I'm Rachel, by the way. Rachel Macbeth." We shook hands. "I'm James," I said. "James Prescott. I'm the new guy, I guess." "Well, it's been a while since we had any new staff. The position had been open for ages before your application, so welcome to the paleontology department." I smiled again. "You're too kind, Miss Macbeth." She chuckled, a bit nervously. "Call me Rachel, please. No reason to be standoffish with newbies, don't you think?" "I guess not." She gestured for me to follow her, and we walked down the long hallway until we reached a door at the end. She unlocked it and opened it, and I was greeted by her office. It was an immaculately tidy space that was clearly reserved for her alone. There was a large mural on the wall, adorned with illustrations of extinct fish. They were covered in armor, with a pair of curved pectoral fins protruding from their sides. They didn't have a visible mouth, and their eyes were positioned on the tops of their heads. From the research I did while preparing for my job, I recognized them as placoderms of some sort. "They're Antiarchs," Rachel said, realizing I was gazing at the mural. "Placoderm fish. They're not the impressive ones with the big jaws, but I do prefer them." "So you're interested in these Antiarchs, huh?" I said. "I mean, you've got an entire wall covered in them." "Yeah, they independently evolved the ability to crawl up along the seabed. Some people think they could haul themselves up onto land. I mean, what's not to like?" I shrugged. "I mean, they're not dinosaurs, but they still sound interesting." There was a brief moment of awkward silence. She certainly seemed excited enough for that to be the case. She suddenly got out of her chair and began fumbling in the drawers of her desk. I was about to ask what she was doing when she pulled out a large black object. It was about 1.5 meters long, covered in fine pits. There was a joint in the middle, and as Rachel moved it, the segmented structure fell limply. "Can you tell me what this is?" she asks. I walked over to inspect it more closely, and now that I could see it properly, its surface seemed to consist of a mishmash of armor plates. It was obviously from an animal of some kind, but I had no clue what. "I haven't a clue," I said at last. "Well," Rachel said, "nobody does. I suspect it's a heavily modified pectoral fin, adapted for terrestrial locomotion." I was confused. "Well, what do you think it's from?" I asked. Rachel looked up at me for a moment. "Take a guess," she said, pointing at the mural again. I looked up at the mural again and then down at the limb, and while it wasn't immediately obvious, there were definitely some similarities between them. They were both covered in armor plates, both had fine pits dotting their surface, and they were both segmented in roughly the same place. But that didn't make sense. "I don't understand," I said at last. "Plecoderms have been extinct for, 350 million years?" "Well, that is the current consensus," Rachel said. "But if I'm right, that's just been turned on its head. This," she said, pointing again, "may come from a distant member of the lineage, but it's no longer in the fossil record. This means there's a ghost lineage of about 359 million years, which, might I add, seems long enough for a species of Antiarchi to evolve terrestrially." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Rachel was suggesting that a group of fish that had been extinct since the Devonian was not only alive, but had somehow managed to conquer the land at around the same time as their distant ancestors. "This really isn't possible," I said. "That's what I thought," Rachel said, "before I had it sent for genetic analysis. The divergence time was recovered at about 463 million years ago, and that's roughly the same time jawed vertebrates first appeared. Now, I still have more tests to do," she said, looking more excited than ever. "But I think we've got something here." We chatted some more after that, and the conversation slowly drifted from the new specimen to work in general. After about a half an hour, we said our goodbyes and parted ways. I didn't exactly know what to think of what she'd shown me, but I highly doubted anything like that could be faked. That, and she seemed too much of a respectable woman to fake it. But honestly, I was excited to meet her again and see the specimen once more, along with any data she might have collected. But that's when things started to get strange. I didn't hear from Rachel again for another few weeks. I wasn't sure where she went, but almost 2 months had passed since our last conversation, and I hadn't seen her, or heard anything about her. I called the university to see what was going on, and they told me they'd had no word of her either. And not only that, but the rest of my research project came to a halt. All the funding that came with it dried up as soon as she went off the radar. Now, things weren't going well for me at the time. I was in a pretty bad state of mind for obvious reasons. I needed something, anything to occupy my wary mind, and so I changed my viewpoint slightly. I started to think of this as nothing more than a problem to be worked out. It might not have been healthy to think of a potential missing persons case like that, but for whatever reason, it worked for me. Last week, almost a month after our last chat, the lab technician sent me a message saying that someone had arrived, looking to speak with me. That person had seen Rachel on the grounds, and that they'd been talking to her. Apparently, she told them about a behind-the-scenes project she was working on. Now, I was worried. If she'd been working on something directly involving the museum, surely she would have mentioned it, let alone set foot in the building. And this is where I think I made my biggest mistake. I decided to take matters into my own hands, and after asking around, I found out where Rachel lived. I set off this afternoon. Incidentally, it was Halloween. The drive to her house was probably more than an hour, and I was in no state to do anything like that. I didn't even have a cell phone to call for help if anything happened, but I decided it was worth the risk. Maybe something was wrong. As soon as my shift ended, I got into my car and I made my way to the address listed. It was dark by the time I got there. I pulled up into the gravel driveway and stared at the house. 23 Buxton Street. Yeah, that was the right house. Unlike the other houses on the street, there were no Halloween decorations, no lights, nothing. The next step was to get out of the car. I was exhausted. I'm not sure why, but my pulse was racing. I was also feeling a bit nervous. What if something was wrong? I hadn't actually considered what I'd do. But once I got out of the car, I suddenly realized that I didn't have a damn thing prepared. I wasn't going to knock on the door. After what had happened earlier today, it was out of the question. So I just stood there, not really knowing what to do. My options were pretty limited. I could either walk away and wait for Rachel to return to her house, or I could start knocking incessantly on the door in the vain hope that she was inside. I opted for the latter. It was probably stupid, but I couldn't help it. I started banging on the door. It was getting darker and colder. The wind was picking up. I was pretty sure I heard thunder. It was getting late, and I heard footsteps and then a female voice. "Who is it?" "It's James." The door creaked open. It was Rachel. She looked scared. "What are you doing here?" she mumbled. "Well, I just need to talk to you." "Okay." She led the way inside, closing the door behind us. I was standing in the living room hallway, taking in her state. She looked like she hadn't slept properly in days. Her brunette hair was disheveled, actually. Rachel herself was disheveled. She was wearing tracksuit bottoms and a dirty white crop top, but they did little to disguise her physical state. She was thin and pale. Her stomach was slightly distended. She looked malnourished, completely different from the enthusiastic, upbeat woman I'd talked to just a couple of weeks prior. She gestured vaguely towards a big graying sofa, and I sat down. "What is it you want to talk about?" she asked. Her voice sounded tired. "Where have you been?" "Where have I been?" "Yeah." I stared at her, trying to get a read on her. "I've been here. Where else do you think I've been?" "I don't know, it's just, well, you've not been to work for ages. I'm curious why you haven't come back." She sighed and slumped down into the sofa next to me, and now I could see her better. Her eyes had a blank, vacant look. "I can't live like this," she said at last, constantly peering over my shoulder, waiting to see if I'm being watched, looking out the windows and expecting to see... I don't know, it's just not safe. I have to leave, and soon. "Where?" "I'm thinking about going to Portugal," she said. "It's a very beautiful country. I went there with my ex-boyfriend once. I should have enough money to live there for a year or two. It's a perfect place for me to begin my new life. I could start afresh." Now I had no idea what she was talking about. We both sat there in silence. I drew in a sharp breath and spoke. "What happened to you?" I asked her at last. She sighed, glancing furtively to the window. "The specimen," she said. "It's not the only one. There are more of these things out there, and they're alive. They're predators, and I think..." She paused. "I think they're intelligent." Now, I didn't believe what I was hearing for a second. It just sounded insane. Yeah, that must have been it. She had to have had a mental breakdown. Rachel frowned, her blue eyes narrowing in frustration. She'd sussed out that I didn't believe what she was saying. "Just look out the window," she said. I glanced at her, and then at the window. Cautiously, I got off the sofa and made my way towards the window. The window looked out over the front garden, and I could see the silhouette of my muddy car. In my indecision, I'd left the headlights on. I saw a couple of glowing lights in the darkness, and then they started moving. Not like a pair of headlights, though. Like eyes. As I watched, the gaunt creatures strode out of the darkness, illuminated by my car's headlights. The thing walked on 2 armored legs, each tipped with 3 stout claws. Its tail was a leg too, though. The thing's head was short, covered in bony plates, and there were no discernible jaws. A pair of round eyes gazed, unmoving and unblinking, into the darkness. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, except for, that is, the specimen in the museum. The legs were about the right size. They were jointed in the right place. The color was wrong, but I subconsciously attributed it to decomposition. There was no mistaking it. It was some kind of placoderm. A lamb placoderm. How intelligent are they? I finally asked, eyes fixed on the thing. Well, Rachel started. As soon as I saw them the other day, I could tell that they were very aware of me. They'd watch me, following me as I walked along the street the last time I was out. I don't know if they could understand what I was saying to you outside, but they definitely reacted to it. As we both stared at the thing, it suddenly turned around. It was glaring right at us, its shining eyes transfixed on us. Rachel's hand reached up to grab a hold of my arm. The glow of the creature's eyes seemed to fade a bit, and then a cacophony of ear-splitting high-pitched wailing came from the thing. "What's it doing?" I asked her. I didn't think she'd know, but she did. She started. "It's calling for its pack." My heart sank as she said that. "Pack?" I asked. "You mean these things live in groups?" "Yes," she replied. She seemed kind of out of it, and I'm not even sure if she was paying attention. Either way, I was at a complete loss. I'd never seen anything like an Antiarchi before. The creatures started wailing again. "Why haven't you called the police, Rachel?" She was still fixated on the thing outside. "What the hell are they gonna do?" she said. "If I told them there was a living Antiarchi outside and it wanted to eat me alive for the past few weeks, they'd think it was a prank call. If I told them that someone was in my house, I doubt they'd show up with machine guns." Now I had to agree with her. The thing seemed to just stare at us for a while, and then it slowly turned around and started walking away. Its eerie cries drifted along in the still air behind it. I just stared after it, expecting another one to appear from among the Halloween decorations lining the streets. I wasn't too confident about our chances against them, even if we had weapons. Rachel didn't seem too worried though, and I didn't see any point in bothering her any further. She was too tired to try and rationalize what we were seeing, and she just seemed to have accepted it. "Okay, so what's your plan?" I asked, trying to sound calm. I was anything but. "What if it comes back with its pack?" I fretted to myself. What chance would we stand then? "Maybe we should get going," Rachel said. "I don't know if there's any point in trying, though." She was right. We didn't know how many of the things were out there, and if they were as dangerous as she made them sound, I doubted we could get into my car quickly enough. I was jolted back to reality by a deafening crash in the direction of the kitchen. Rachel suddenly bolted upright, crying out in alarm. "Jesus!" she exclaimed. I saw her face flush with panic as I got up off the sofa. Then I heard an indistinct sound. 2 heavy thuds, followed by a third. It almost sounded like a 3-legged person walking, and then the realization came to me. It was one of the creatures, and it was inside the house. "There's no time. We need to get upstairs," Rachel told me, and I heard her breath catch. I felt like I was going to faint. More thuds from the kitchen, and I realized that there were more of the things. As we turned to run, the kitchen doors burst open, and one of the things stood in front of us. A horrid stench of decay overtook my nostrils, and I retched as the animal stood, blinking in the harsh light of the living room. The thing started to approach, and a faint whistling sound emitted from what I can only assume was a pair of nostrils. "Rachel," I whispered. "Go, I'll keep it distracted." "But," she started, eyes wide and fixed on the beast, but I cut her off. "Go. I'll find a way out myself." Now that was probably the worst mistake I made, as I'd forgotten one key aspect of predator behavior. They always go for the one which runs away. And that was when the thing made its move. It was like a blur of black and red moving in on Rachel. It slammed her to the floor, pinning her down with its front limbs, precariously balanced on its tail. In a single swift motion, its huge claws tore into her bare stomach, tearing flesh and sending a fine mist of blood spurting into the air. As Rachel opened her mouth to scream, the thing's jaws sprang open like those of a bobbit worm, and then they closed around her throat with such speed and force that it nearly decapitated her. Then, mercifully, it brought its powerful right forelimb down on her skull. And I think, no hope, that she died instantly. I just stared for a few moments, shocked into inaction. Eventually I tore myself away from my own fear and ran towards the door. I just had time to turn the handle before another of the things lunged at me from the kitchen. I pulled the door open and hurled myself into the hallway. I pretty much launched myself through the nearest door, slammed it behind me, locked it, and that was when I found out that my dumbass had just locked myself into a broom closet. And that's where I've been ever since. I haven't seen either of the things for about an hour by this point. That's how long it's been since I locked myself in the broom closet. I do know that one of the Antiarchs is in the corridor outside. It moves and jerks, its joints clicking and grinding with each movement. I could hear the faint clacking of its strange jaws as they grind together in anticipation of its next meal. There's probably nothing left of Rachel now. The Antiarch's getting closer. I know I should stay in here and hope I survive, but I'm not convinced that I can. That, and I don't feel like dying in a desolate corner of the building, stuck in a broom closet. Now, I don't actually know why I'm writing this. I could be calling the emergency services, or at least trying to escape, but something tells me neither of those options would be useful at this point. I suppose it's just a way of getting things off my chest, and I doubt anyone will ever know this happened, save for whoever eventually bursts in and finds this. I'm gonna go outside now. It's no use cowering, waiting for my inevitable death. I've always wanted to go down and blaze of glory, for my final act to be one of courage. Plus, it's Halloween, so why the hell not? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do my best to go down fighting. I have no illusions about the outcome, but screw that. I'm not going down that easily.